smaller $200,000. I mean,
Right.
are those the type? Do you have those conversations at
Definitely.
that time, or is it more?
Definitely.
Okay.
We're just finished with a client in Florida that did that very thing. They were thinking, okay, and that very issue is a community center. And when a hurricane would come through, there drew straws who would run out there and unbolt the community center so it would fly away. And that way it became an immediate issue. And that's exactly what the city manager told us. I'm like, no, time out, wait a minute, we're not going to have that discussion about who's going out there in this, in our area is a tornado, and they were definitely scared of that. But yeah, that kind of discussion takes place. And what we like to take it, or frame that discussion, if you will, is three different areas. A is, what outcomes can I achieve with the budget we have now in the places we have now, in the buckets we're using? What outcomes can we achieve in rearranging some of that, like within a department? And then the last one, the toughest one, is do I need additional resources, whatever that might be, in order to achieve that goal? And the community center was one of them that they were talking about. Where they ended was the community center maybe a goal that's down the road. We're going to make decisions today to attract commercial entities so that new revenue source becomes property tax that they're paying. But that new property tax isn't going to go for anything else but a bucket to pay for the community center. And that was a discussion they had in their strategic planning process, that vision process.
So a savings account based on the desired outcome?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, of course, it comes back to the discipline to be able to maintain that. Because you're dealing with fires you fight every day, the proverbial, not the literal fires, well, sometimes literal fires you fight every day. And it from your perspective, I would imagine it would make you feel, wow, torn between, okay, this one is for the community center, the greater good of that community center, versus this thing just blew up. So what do we do now? Yeah.
So, is this also a tool that, because you've got citizen engagement as part of the process, you know, they're going to want things like what Christy was saying, a community center, and I'm glad that she brought that up, because I think that people always want a nice community center. But is this a way, when you're managing towards outcomes, of also managing expectations?
Potentially. It depends on, we'll just take the direction finders, for example. One of the questions that we had, and I think he still throws it in there for everybody, is okay, well, where would you line up those priorities? I want a community center, and I do, because I got a 12 and 11-year-old want to dump off there, but I also want the road to be nice when I get there. Now, I could...
Yeah, rate it.
So what is it? So then I asked the question of my wife, what's the highest priority? Well, is it the community center or the road? Well, it makes more sense to have the road nice so I can get there. Maybe the community center is a long-term process or a long-term goal, but don't lose sight of it because I want to eventually get there, kind of thing.
Yeah, but that commercial growth is also a third leg into that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Into that funding option. And peeling that off, either splitting it, which is what they're thinking about doing now, splitting, because new taxes or new sales tax, I know you guys probably, I can't remember, I think there was a mill levy here a number of years ago increased. Well, you can't sustain that, obviously, so any new growth, you peel it off and stick it over in a fund.
Right.
But you're also not harming, say, the budget you have to adopt or the services you have to be able to provide. I mean, there's some costs that are just fixed. Salaries, increases, benefits, there's a whole number. Even fuel costs.
Fuel costs.
Fuel costs.
Cost of materials, all those
astronomical.
things
Right.
are costs that
But if you know those
no
resources,
control over.
but if you know those resources,
Right.
and you know what fixed costs you do have, then the question comes, is there anything left over you can peel off on that new growth?
On that, right.
Yeah.
You've mentioned the citizen survey before, and I think citizen involvement's very important.
Yeah.
I know that last time that we discussed, and it was before I was on the council, doing a citizen survey, you know, one of the things that was talked about was, and you mentioned Direction Finder, I believe that's who we use.
ETC, Everett State.
Yeah. And if we were, for instance, to work with them again this year, is there ways that we can tailor the questions better so that we can have better ideas of what kind of outcomes we want. Some of the questions that we have had in the past have seemed a little generic. I know that Councilwoman Harrison mentioned that she's looking for questions that have some actionable outcomes. Your experience in Olathe and working with ETC, I mean, how willing are they to help us put that survey together in such a way that it would benefit, this outcome-based budgeting?
And working with HCC, my experience has been that they want to maintain as much of a comparison from year to year as possible, but they were willing to sit down with the city manager and talk about what some of those questions might look like and what we do want to get out of them. More times than not, the questions we really wanted, he already had embedded in there. We wanted them by area, geographical area. How did they respond in this area to this issue versus a separate area? And that became incredibly important. And some of the other things are really the chicken and the egg. Does the direction finders come first, or does your vision come
yeah,
first?
that's what I was just going to say.
Yeah, and is it something you move forward at the same time?
And that's the way it is structured. I mean, it's built around those basic services
Yeah.
that cities, counties provide.
Yeah.
We, of course, have electric and water and wastewater that are not always part of cities, but that's a piece of it.
Right.
And then, we can, it's managing the cost of that survey is where we get to at that point. What we add to it incrementally improves. We've been lucky that we were one of the first cities that began that process.
Right.
We're kind of, we get the
You got some
Founders
history,
Club
yeah.
pricing in
Yeah, yeah.
so
You got
that's
some
very
history with
helpful.
it.
So we do have
Right.
some
Yeah.
flexibility where we can add and modify, and we have changed questions based on
Yeah. Or added
current events or added questions and so on. But yeah, I do know they like to keep that, the base questions around the services so that we can,
Right.
we can benchmark
We have
Parks and Rec satisfaction with Parks and Rec in the metro area or nationally,
That's right.
or
Yeah.
Public Works, in the metro area versus nationally.
And questions were asked. Other entities have been able to ask questions about communication style. I mean, where do you
Right.
get your city news?
Mhm.
Certain newsletters outranked any newspaper in town, and that's where they got their city news. It wasn't what the reporter was, I hope there's no newspapers here, but it wasn't what the reporters were trying to do good for the city, it was in that newsletter.
Right.
Because I tell you, that was one of the things was on the chopping block, and Direction Finder says, don't you dare take that away from me.
So that physical piece of paper in your utility bill is what you're referencing. Interesting.
That's what they wanted, because that's where they got their news. Well, and it turned out to be an actual newsletter that got mailed out through the utility system, the customer base. Yeah.
I'm familiar with it.
That is my presentation.
Questions, other questions? Great,
I
thank you,
appreciate
sir.
your time.
Very good.
Illuminating.
Now, are you spending the next few weeks here, or do we have someone else from?
Ben won't be here.
I won't.
Ben, you won't be here? Oh,
He won't be
okay.
there. Not that he wouldn't.
Love to, absolutely love to, right.
Laura doesn't want me back.
Okay. Next item is the overview of the first piece, the business community input for the visioning process. Cheryl.
Mayor and members of council, the purpose of this presentation is to give an overview of the efforts that we've started to move towards budgeting for outcomes by starting with that piece that has to do with vision. Almost 10 years ago, in looking at some of the material through Harvard Business Review, they described the characteristics of high-performance organizations. And the article went on to talk about high-performance organizations know where they're going, how they're going to get there, they have resources in place to get there, and then they kind of have markers to determine how they get there. And the way we translate that to what we do